Hi. A dragonfly flew into my mouth on my bike ride over here this morning, so I'm off to a great start. I don't know about you guys, but I'm glad you're here. Taxidermy is weird. This talk I'm going to kind of address some of the ways in which taxidermy is weird, some of the ways that it isn't, whether this is actual or perceived, and I'll let you know a little bit about my thought process on the craft and the industry. To be honest, I bristled a little bit when told that the theme for my talk was weird. Taxidermy is my calling, it's my craft, and the raw materials are animal fibers, and these are fibers that have inspired me since I was a kid, collecting shells on the beach or snake skins in the woods. And so I wasn't sure how comfortable I felt with slapping the label weird onto something that is so ingrained into my psyche. However, I'd be remiss to act like skinning a raccoon hanging from a meat hook in my basement is akin to a Sunday stroll on the beach collecting the sea's castaways on the sand, unless you're walking in Montauk. And that's actually the Montauk Monster, which turned out to be a raccoon. So maybe there's more similarities. It would also be dishonest of me to claim that I wasn't enticed by the rarity and exoticness of taxidermy in the art world when I picked up a scalpel and skinned my first bird back in 2000. What I didn't realize, though, at the time was that there were several artists around the globe doing very similar things to me, all unbeknownst to each other. And this is a work of Serena Brewer. This is the Ivory Griffin from 2008. And Serena is an artist and naturalist who has been using animal parts in her artwork for over 2 decades. And she's completely self-taught and astounding. She's known for her interspecies fantasy mounts. And she basically blazed the trail for the younger generation and the upcoming generation of taxidermy alternative enthusiasts like myself and many others. She also, along with 2 other artists, started a group called MART, which is the Minnesota Association of Rogue Taxidermy. And what this online and national collective did was provide a space for us to find each other and inspire each other. Which was, it served a lot of good over the years. Iris Schaefer Steen is another artist. She's Dutch, and she's been exhibiting since 1993. And her work is oozing with dark humor. I couldn't get a proper picture of it for the slideshow, but I don't know if anyone remembers Popples from the 80s. So there are these plush balls that you would get for your kid, or if you were a kid in the 80s, you would have one. And you could stick your hand in the pocket and invert it and turn it inside out, and it became a stuffed animal, like a little plush toy for you to play with. And so, unfortunately, I don't have a picture, but she created a popple that was a dog on one side, and then you reached your hand into a pocket in the dog, turned it inside out, and it became a cat. She also made handbags from her deceased pet dogs and lots of other stuff that made a kind of morbid splash in the art world internationally. This is a smaller portion of a larger piece called Life Can Be So Nice from 2001. And as you can see, it's kind of an interspecies mashup of all these, like, every kind of animal, and they're suspended in a preservative behind glass. So all of this is to say that this momentum had been building by the time that I joined in. And over the next decade, I found a network of artists who were experimenting and doing very similar things with this centuries-old craft, completely independent of one another. And something that seemed so macabre and obscure was slowly having a pendulum swing in the other direction into palatable and almost more easy to view. Like, you started seeing taxidermy in, you know, couture hotels and lobbies and stuff. So it wasn't long ago, though, that taxidermy was everywhere. It was commonplace in the home of every self-respecting Victorian. Mounted creatures of the feathered and fur variety were everywhere, serving as decor for self and home. You could actually buy very hastily stuffed birds at the stand next to the cheese stand in the farmer's market. Like, it was everywhere. And this excessive and unbridled enthusiasm for owning preserved animals, it drove several species to the point of extinction or very near it, like snowy egrets, owls, passenger pigeons, to name a few. These birds were prized not only as exotic creatures to be studied and displayed in the home, but also for their plumage and their tail feathers, as you can see dripping from these ladies' hats. And bear in mind, back then, you wore a hat to walk to the post office. Like, women wore hats to do everything. So when you think about these wealthy women and how many hats they owned and how many events they had, you can start to kind of add up in your head all these birds that are being sourced for their feathers or for just their entire bodies as full taxidermy mounts. So the extinction of the passenger pigeon sort of marked a time when this social attitude about taxidermy sort of swung in the other direction, and it ushered in conservation laws and regulations about sourcing these animals. Times changed, people lived differently, and it began to seem cumbersome to wear an entire taxidermy chicken on your head. So that said, this is actually one of my pieces. I can understand why it would seem weird to just pop into a cafe with an entire chicken mount on your head to open your laptop and do some work for a few hours. It's just a different time and we live a different way. But perhaps it's not the rarity of seeing taxidermy everywhere that makes it so weird. Maybe it's the thing itself, which is death. Taxidermy communicates an intimacy with death, and at a time where humans have technologically advanced ourselves into a place where we couldn't be further removed from death, it definitely seems weird that I would stop on the side of the road and pick up a freshly killed squirrel that was just hit by a car, stuff it in my bag, and ride home and pop it in the freezer like it's nothing. I would hazard a guess that most folks in this room have not handled corpses or carcasses with their hands, and that's because it's just not the world we live in today. But it was only a century ago that handling the body of a deceased loved one was completely normal as part of the mourning process, and your family member would die in the home, and dressing them, bathing, grooming them was all part of the funeral process. Nowadays, bodies are whisked out of sight, often from the hospital where they have perished, and undergo a series of procedures that make them presentable again for the impending funeral. This is actually just a silly picture from the website of the Order of the Good Death, which is a group of morticians and death professionals based out of Los Angeles who are striving to kind of revive the old-fashioned ways that we handle death. Because it's their belief, and I share this, that when you become so removed from death that you really barely experience it, it just prolongs the denial process, and it kind of makes grieving a very twisted and uncomfortable, more uncomfortable than it already is experience. So that said, I feel that handling these dead creatures, for me, it's a constant reminder to be present in my life and that nothing's guaranteed and everything is fleeting, nothing's permanent. But it's not just me and taxidermists that are working with these dead animals. There's your day-to-day life. You're surrounded by animal products and byproducts, whether you realize it or not. It could be something like Obviously, if you eat meat, you are dealing with animal products. If you wear leather shoes, your belt, your bike seat, glycerin, which is in a lot of medications and even tattoo ink, is often derived from animal fats. So there's just all these little ways that we're touched by animal byproducts that we don't think about. And somewhere along those lines, human hands were working to source these products. And so that said, I'm going to circle back to eating meat, which you'd be surprised to learn a lot of these alternative taxidermists these days are vegans and don't eat meat and actually love animals very much. And it's their belief, it's many of our beliefs, that you're honoring the animal that expired by being hit by a car or disease somehow naturally by using every part. I do eat meat. And oh, this is, sorry, I'm a little disjointed. I don't know if you guys, you can read that, right? So let me go back to this. This is something I like to call shit you only hear in the taxidermy studio. My friend Serena, whose work you just saw a few minutes ago, this is a screenshot of a text message that she sent. It's kind of about the gallows humor that you have to have, that I'm sure morticians have and doctors have. When you deal with death so much, you do get this kind of dark, morbid sense of humor. And she gave me that gem and it was hilarious, so I had to sneak it in here. When I'm teaching classes at UArts, I often hear some of the things that we're saying to each other, and I think if someone walked by in the hallway right now, I don't know what they would think is going on. Like, just make sure you get that squirrel head decapitated before 4 o'clock or else I can't help you. Or just stuff that like out of context makes absolutely no sense and could sound horrifying. So about eating meat. I do eat meat and I love to eat meat and I love the taste of it, but I'm very picky about where it comes from. And over the course of my career in taxidermy, I've learned to use what the hunters or clients bring me. If it's viable meat and they don't want it, I will not let it go to waste. And so that is undeniably weird, I'll admit it. I've eaten things like rattlesnake, pheasant, deer, duck, squirrel, skunk, coyote, rabbit, and starling. And it's all delicious if you prepare it right. This is actually a skinned and eviscerated squirrel. And if you ignore the skin and the intestines piled up behind it, it actually looks very similar to meat that you would buy at a supermarket or the butcher, just much smaller. And this is the squirrel on the grill with a random hot dog bun. And this is it plated up. Those aren't the greatest pictures, but I just thought I'd show you like from start to finish, kind of. And then another dish is, this is a rabbit that my friend Ina from Peach Pear Plum Photo, she's a photographer and she sat in on a skinning session and she took a rabbit home and she marinated it in this beautiful display and then she grilled it and it looks completely normal and palatable if you eat meat. Like this is the stuff that we eat. I have a lot of strong opinions on how we could all benefit from eating alternative sources of meat, but that's a whole different talk for another time. So maybe it's not the scarcity of taxidermy or the actual handling of dead carcasses that make taxidermy seem so weird. Maybe it's the recent boom in what's come to be known as pet preservation. Some folks are, it's a very divisive topic in the taxidermy world, I'll just say that. Those of us who have pets usually enjoy a profound bond with these animals. I would hazard a guess that anyone in this room who has a pet, you have at least 15 photos of that pet on your phone, and it takes very little prompting to show those photos. And that's because we care so deeply for these animals, and when they die, navigating the path of bidding farewell can be excruciating and clumsy. Some choose cremation, others opt for a backyard burial, and a smaller yet growing subset choose to hold on to some kind of tactile keepsake by having their beloved preserved by a taxidermy. when I was in school for taxidermy, my instructor, Bill Allen of the Pocono Institute, stressed to never, ever mount pets. And I didn't ask him why, but I'll make an educated guess, and it's that the emotions steeped into these animals are so intense. They're too intense for any taxidermist to do justice to. A deer trophy that a hunter will bring me, he or she just met that deer the day they shot it. It's hard enough to recreate a beast like that from nature, but the expressive face of Fluffers, who's gazed lovingly into the eyes of his human for 13 years, that's almost impossible. Yet somehow pet preservation has been a significant part of my business for years, until just recently when I phased it out. But here are some of the pets that I have worked with over the years. And there's some traditional options for preservation, and they've also got some kind of creative and alternative decisions that my clients made. This is Bill, and his human just wanted him curled up sleeping, which is simple enough. This is Max, the blue-nosed pit bull. They just wanted him standing at attention, sitting at attention. It's very difficult mount. This is Coco the parrot, and they just wanted him perched onto his favorite little tree branch, and they took him home and put him in this elaborate home cage setup display that takes up an entire wall that they made for him. He was 25 years old. And this is a German Shepherd whose name I actually completely forget. I do remember the human's name, but I won't share it because she might not want people to know who she is. But she's a fellow artist, and she chose to have her German Shepherd's head mounted as like a trophy style on a plaque. And often I'll post photos of my finished work on my social media, and the pets always get a very mixed reaction. And without exception, there's always one person who will voice disgust. And to that I say, you're completely welcome to your opinion, obviously. But I would like for some people to be more informed about the history of grief rituals throughout mankind before they opine quite so loudly and so strongly. Because to some people it might seem vulgar to toss your dog in a cardboard box and throw it in the backyard. Mourning is extremely personal, and I believe that every person should feel free to explore how they move through it without judgment or shame. That said, here's some other kind of alternative pets. This is Bobby the Gosling, who my friend Lewis rescued from the woods. Unfortunately, he didn't live too long, so he wanted him preserved like an angel as a Christmas tree topper. So put some chicken wings on him and a halo, and he's been ushering in their holiday season for years now. This is Bijou, the Dumbo Rat. She's very special to her human and very regal, so she wanted her kind of like on a velvet, regal-like setting with a crown or something shiny on her head. And this is Pepper the Hedgehog. And the client said, just do whatever you want. And that's my favorite kind of project, because then I do what I want, which is the best case scenario. And so Pepper is forever hovering over into the air. And this is Windsor. Windsor was a 100+ pound German Shepherd that the woman who owned Windsor was about to move to a much colder climate, and he died right before she moved. And she wanted a way to keep him with her but not have to lug around this giant, enormous taxidermy mount. And so why not just have the hide tanned in a soft garment leather quality way, so she can take him with her as a blanket to keep her warm, like in the afterlife, since he's not snuggling with her anymore. This was one of my all-time favorite projects to work on because he was so huge. That's a size 9.5 boot next to him, just for an idea of how large this dog was. So huge, so beautiful, and I think it's a really great palatable way to have a keepsake if you're not ready to like be staring at your pet's eyes for eternity. And this is Mr. Whiskers the Cat. His owner just wanted him turned into a pillow, which is really simple. It's it's a tactile way to remember your loved one. Some people choose for just paw charms and skulls. And These aren't pets. Earlier I mentioned the practice of alternative taxidermy, like what Serena and Iris and many of us are getting up to. And this was a commission for some friends of mine. They just wanted squirrels as bookends doing double guns. So alternative taxidermy basically means employing the craft of taxidermy to create pieces that aren't exact replications of nature. It can be taxidermy as a medium incorporated into other disciplines. It can be mashups of species, or just squirrels doing things that you would never see a squirrel doing in a tree or in a park. So somehow all of us were independently drawn to creating pieces like this. And when preparing for this presentation, earlier I said, like, it's kind of a little, not sure how I felt about using the word weird for what I do, but just to be sure, I looked up the word weird, and according to dictionary.com, it means uncanny or supernatural, which suddenly I don't mind so much, because I feel like that word perfectly describes what myself and these other alternative taxidermists are doing. And the verb actually means inducing a sense of disbelief or alienation in someone. And that may sound like a negative thing, but I actually can relate to that sense since I was a child, and I often chose to separate myself from large groups and spend the hours whiling away in my bedroom making weird art and jewelry. And I think a lot of artists can actually relate to feeling alienated in a sense, and that's something that we talk about much more openly these days. I think we use our work to express in a tactile and visual way what we just can't find the words for. So here's a few more examples of some alternative taxidermy. This is who is this? This is Jabbercocky, again from Serena. It's a squirrel with a chicken, and this is a recent piece from 2016. This is Ophelia from a French duo known as The Idiots, and it's one of the most spectacular lion mounts I've ever seen, and it's just breathtaking. I don't know what it means, but it's just gorgeous to me that there's this sleeping female lioness with gold just oozing out of her torso. This is one of my pieces. This is Sassmouth Peacock, and he's a full presentation pose peacock mount, and he's a little embellished, and he's got a tongue that you would never see on a bird, and he's just licking his beak. I like to make crystal balls with deer and calf hooves. And this is Lamb Bag. It's a soft mount lamb, and I just decided to turn him into a handbag, and he worked out really well. This was a goat fetus, still in an embryonic sac when I actually received him. A lot of this stuff is from farms, by the way, if you're wondering where I get these animals. Farms experience a lot of life and a lot of death, and so you make friends with a farmer, they know where to send their stuff when it passes away. So this was a goat fetus, and I thought, why not turn him into a beautiful hat so he can see the world from on top of someone's head. These are Horseshoes by Iris Schaefer, Steen. She did a whole series of these in the early 2000s. And this is what's called a soft mount. This is a skunk that a client brought to me, and he wanted something to bring into the office and play pranks on his coworkers. So a soft mount is like what I was saying with the popple. It's when you have the hide tanned, so it's kind of like a garment quality, very pliable material. And so it's literally, when you use that kind of hide, if you're doing like a typical deer head mount on the wall, it's tanned in a different way so that it's very stiff when it dries. This is a soft tan, and it's literally a stuffed animal. You just stuff the animal. I put batting and armature wire inside so he can be posed in different positions, and so he he still enjoys placing them around the office in different poses to this day and freaking out people. And then to kind of wrap it up, I thought I would just talk a little bit about, just to give you guys an idea of the process of how these pieces are made. This is called Self-Portrait. This is actually one of the pieces I did for that show, Immortalized, and it was a great opportunity. They gave me a huge budget. I loved every second of it. And with that budget, I made this piece, which is a coyote fiercely lunging forward, I was trying to convey a like, don't fuck with me vibe with this coyote. And it's hard to see in this picture, but inside the coyote's hollowed out chest is this cavity lined with thousands of Swarovski crystals, dripping with chandelier jewels. And there's a tiny little kitten inside kind of mimicking this posture, but when this adorable little kitten's doing it, it's very playful and it's much less fierce. And it's kind of cliche, but that's how I feel about myself. Like I try to put out this very tough exterior, but inside I'm just a sweet little kitten. And so the making of this piece was pretty complicated. That's what a taxidermy form looks like when you order it from any online source. And you get this foam mannequin, which looks like a carcass. And so I had to cut it in half and then hollow out the cavity and line it with just a certain kind of goo that would help everything stay together. And then we wired it up with LED lights so it would light up on the inside. And then it also involved carcass casting. So this is a barn kitten that lived on a farm. I don't know if anyone's heard of Ardelia Farm, but they're friends of mine. They live in Vermont, and they give me all of their deadsies. And this was a little barn kitten who they found one day. And so to make a carcass cast, I don't know if anyone has experience with mold making or anything. I kind of learned as I went with this, but you freeze the animal in the position that you want them to be in ultimately. And then you take them out of the freezer, pour silicone around it, make this silicone mold. And this is after I cut it in half and I'm starting to extract the actual carcass from the mold. And then you pour foam back into the mold after you put it together. And as you can see, I had no idea how to measure how much I needed. So I had like a mountain of injectable foam that I had to chip away at for an hour to finally get this teeny tiny little foam mannequin, which was a kitten. And it kind of doesn't look like much, but if you look really hard, you can see like some rib definition and some facial definition, which is a really spectacular way to make your own mannequins for taxidermy, because a lot of stuff just isn't available in the size and shape that you need. And then the end result was the skin on this little form emerging from this bright Swarovski crystal cave inside the coyote. And that's about, I don't know how I am on time, I just had extra pictures, but that's it. That's taxidermy. Taxidermy's weird and it's not weird. Thank you.